So this is just a really beautiful flower to have, to know how to do on some of these modern piping design cakes. It's definitely very dynamic, and it's one of those flowers where you could even just put one on the top of your cake and it looks fabulous. But I'm going to show you a way to add a few accent flowers. The next flower that I'm going to show you is a rose, but it's actually a variation of a rose. It's going to be a little more rounded and a little more layered. So that is why I prefer these larger rose tips. They really, really work great for this look. So I'm going to take my buttercream. I added a little bit of white into it. Sometimes with buttercream flowers, the darker the color you go, the harder it is to get them to want to keep their shape. So with things like roses, I tend to go lighter in color, but as you can see, when we hold that up to our cake, it still complements that cake really, really beautifully. So, don't be afraid to sort of mix up your tones a little bit when you're making the buttercream flowers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fill my bag. Get it to a point that, we got to get that air out of there. You can hear that popping. That's just the air that collects when you fill a buttercream bag. So that's why we always recommend when you fill a bag to squeeze out a little bit to get that air out of there. Okay, so to make our rounded rose, we're going to need a rose nail, we're going to need our rose tip, and a handy little offset spatula hanging out there. So we're going to need that to transfer it off of the rose nail in a second. So one of the things when you do your rose, you want to make sure you have a nice sturdy base. If it's too wobbly, when you go to do your rose, it could topple over. So be very cautious that it's nice and sturdy. And then when I start my rose, I'm going to start with the thick side down and the thin side up. So we're going to give it a little swirl there. You can kind of bring that down the rose if you'd like. And the difference between the sort of the rounded rose and the regular one is when I start it, can you guys see I'm actually tilting in my rose tip, sort of in an inward direction, whereas in a normal rose you would hold it more straight up and down. So when you sort of round it in like that, it gives the beginning of that flower a really beautiful center. So we're basically going to keep overlapping, and every petal that we make, we're going to backtrack a little bit and make the second petal from where that one ended about halfway. Okay, so we're starting to layer that really nicely. Now as we kind of come outward on our rose here, we can start to turn our tip a little bit more towards us. So whereas initially we had it facing sort of in towards the center, now we can sort of tilt it out a little bit to open up those rose petals. And that creates a really beautiful rounded rose. I'm going to go ahead and transfer that onto the top of my cake using my little offset. This is tricky, so you have to be careful. But what you want to do is take your offset and slide it directly under, position it where you want it to be, which I'm going to position it right next to my pink mum, and use that little end of that rose nail to sort of guide it off there. So you can see that landed really nicely.